Hello everyone, back again with movie and tune recap. Today, I'm going to explain a British horror film from 2018, titled Malevolent. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. In 1986, in Scotland, two American siblings, Angela and Jackson, run a fake medium scam with the help of a small team of paranormal investigators, Beth and Elliot. They target clients who believe their homes are haunted. Their first client is an elderly man named Frank, who recently lost his wife, Maddie. Frank wants the group to communicate with Maddie's spirit and free her soul from the house. After setting up their equipment, Angela and Elliot, who is recording everything on video, enter a room filled with mannequins while the rest of the team watches from another room. Angela pretends to call out to Maddie's spirit, and Jackson secretly signals Beth to play a pre-recorded message that sounds like Maddie's voice. Jackson then tells Frank that his wife's soul has been freed and has left the house. While Angela is alone, she imagines seeing one of the mannequins move and take the form of Maddie, which startles her, but it was just her imagination. Later, the group celebrates their successful scam and even designs their own promotional flyer. It's revealed that the siblings are using the reputation of their late mother to promote Angela's supposed powers as a medium. Jackson orchestrates these scams because he owes money to loan sharks and has already been beaten several times by them. While alone, Angela is confronted by Elliot, who notices that she's deeply disturbed after their last visit to the house. Angela accuses Elliot and the rest of the team for moving the mannequins to scare her, but Elliot insists he has no idea what she's talking about. Later, Angela is called to meet with her college dean, who expresses concern over her missing school activities and failing to complete her assignments. As they're talking, Angela notices a doorknob shaking. Suddenly, the door swings open, and a man with bloody hands emerges, and Angela begins to bleed as well. Frightened, Angela visits her grandfather, whom she's very close to. When she brings up her deceased mother, her grandfather becomes uneasy and reluctant to discuss her. He mentions that her mother used to talk about hearing voices, a subject he's always tried to avoid. This conversation increases Angela's worries, as she starts to fear that she might be following in her mother's footsteps, who also heard voices and eventually committed suicide after claiming to see people who weren't really there. Back at home, Angela receives a call from a new client, Mrs. Green, who asks the team to come and stop the girls screaming in her house. Still deeply disturbed and shaken from their last assignment, Angela refused the request. Out of curiosity, she researched the history of Mrs. Green's house and discovers a chilling story. 15 years ago, the owner's foster children were found dead with their mouths sewn shut, and her son, Herman, was blamed for the gruesome crime. Jackson, who is desperate for money to pay off the loan sharks, confronts Angela for turning down Mrs. Green's request. He brings up the painful memory of their mother's death, reminding Angela that their mother left them by taking her own life. Despite Angela's reluctance, Jackson insists on taking the job. Meanwhile, after learning about the dark history of their next client's house, Beth considers returning to London. However, Jackson persuades her to stay and help with the job. That night, Angela is awakened by a strange noise. As she wanders through the house, she encounters what appears to be her dead mother in one of the rooms, but it turns out to be a nightmare. The next day, Angela meets with Jackson and reveals her decision to join them on their next investigation, which makes Jackson happy. The group packs up their equipment and sets off to the old lady's house, which is located deep in the forest. After a long drive, they finally arrive and are welcomed by Mrs. Green's gateman. Inside, Mrs. Green explains how she constantly hears screams, laughter, and other horrific disturbances in the house, and all she wants is some peace and quiet. She then shows Angela photos of the three girls, Tabby, Messie, and Clara, who were murdered by her son, Herman. Clara was the first to go missing, and the elderly woman also shows Angela a photo of Herman. As Jackson walks around the house with his headphones on, he's suddenly startled by the gateman. Jackson and his team of technicians come up with a plan to con Mrs. Green using pre-recorded screams during their investigation. They believe this will convince her that they've cleared the house of any spirits, and while the team is discussing the plan, Angela's nose suddenly starts bleeding. She excuses herself to the bathroom, only to find there is no water in the tap. As she tries to clean up, she begins to hear ghostly whispers, which unnerves her, and just then, Elliot startles her. Angela then hears strange noises coming from one of the toilets, prompting her to check each one, but she finds nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, she spots a little girl in the bathroom, and in a panic, drags Elliot into one of the stalls to hide, but the situation takes a dark turn. After regaining consciousness, Angela decides not to tell the group about what she saw, knowing they wouldn't believe her. Instead, she insists that she's fine. As they begin the investigation, Jackson and Beth stay with Mrs. Green in the living room, watching as Elliot and Angela move through the mansion. Angela and Elliot enter a room where she hears a creepy vintage song playing and spots a doll nearby. She also sees the spirit of one of the murdered girls, who seem to be visible only to her. The spirit leads her toward the restricted east wing of the mansion. As they follow, the floor suddenly collapses beneath Elliot, causing him to fall and injure his foot. Hearing the commotion, Jackson leaves Beth with Mrs. Green and rushes to the part of the building where Elliot has fallen. He and Angela use a rope and ladder to reach Elliot. Inside the hidden room, they discover a disfigured doll and the words "Save me" scrawled on a wall. As they explore further, they find more similar messages, leading Angela to realize that this area is where the girls had been kept. She believes that the spirits of the girls somehow guided her to this place. Angela tries to explain to Jackson what she has experienced, seeing the girls and other strange occurrences, but Jackson brushes it off, laughing and insisting there must be logical explanations for everything she's seeing. Frustrated by Jackson's dismissive attitude and his lack of concern for Elliot's injury, Angela angrily storms off with Elliot, insisting they leave the investigation. As they leave, a door in the mansion creaks open on its own before slamming shut with force. Driven by his greed for money, Jackson approaches Mrs. Green and promises they will cleanse her house. However, the elderly woman coldly responds that they have failed and accuses them of being scam paranormal investigators. It becomes clear that Jackson has been experiencing disturbing visions himself, which he had previously tried to block out using drugs and headphones. Realizing the danger, Jackson finally decides to abandon the job, especially after Mrs. Green hints that she was involved in the girls' murders. While searching for Beth, Jackson heads to the living room and discovers that their equipments have been destroyed. As he turns around, he comes face to face with one of the murdered girls. At that moment, Jackson receives a call from Angela through their walkie-talkies, asking him to come help with the injured Elliot. As he makes his way to her, Jackson spots a necklace that belongs to Beth, and both Jackson and Angela are startled by another appearance of one of the murdered girls. Jackson quickly hands Angela the car keys, instructing her to take Elliot to the car while he continues searching for Beth. Inside the elevator, Jackson is haunted by visions of his dead mother, who tells him that she has finally found him. Overcome with fear but determined, Jackson eventually finds Beth unconscious in the attic, with her mouth sewn shut, similar to the girl's fate. Meanwhile, Angela managed to flee the house with Elliot and locks themselves safely in the car, desperately hoping to escape the nightmare they've been trapped in. Shortly after finding Beth, Jackson carries her injured body to the car, where Angela and Elliot are waiting. The group hurriedly tries to drive away. However, as Jackson speeds down the road, he suddenly sees one of the murdered girls in front of the car. Panicking, he runs over the figure, but it turns out to be the gateman, not a ghost. This causes Jackson to lose control of the car, and they crash into a tree. The aftermath of the crash is devastating, as Beth lost her life and Jackson is left sobbing over her body. In his grief, a man wielding a shovel attacks Jackson from behind, knocking him out. The same man then drags the now conscious Elliot out of the wrecked car, and mercilessly finishes him off with the shovel, leaving Angela as the sole survivor. After regaining consciousness, Angela is horrified to find that she's the only one left in the car. She breaks down in tears upon seeing Beth's lifeless body. As she moves closer to Elliot, she discovers that he is still alive. Elliot, though severely injured, managed to tell Angela that a man had carried Jackson back to the house. Determined to rescue her brother, Angela decides to return to the house, despite the overwhelming fear and danger. Meanwhile, Jackson regains consciousness in the house basement, where he finds himself tied to a chair. It becomes clear that the man who knocked him out was Herman, whom Mrs. Green had been secretly hiding all along. The elderly woman begins torturing Jackson, starting by cutting out his tongue and then breaking his jaw with a hammer and chisel. She then begins to sew Jackson's mouth shut, a gruesome ritual she had inflicted on others before. Mrs. Green then coldly orders Herman to go and bring back the rest of the group, intent on finishing what she started. Meanwhile, on her way back to the house, Angela sees one of the murdered girls, who leads her to a hidden room. Inside, Angela discovers the torturing equipment that had been used on the girls. Suddenly, Herman appears behind Angela and knocks her unconscious. Elsewhere, the injured Elliot managed to crawl and grab a nearby stick for support. Determined to help Angela, he slowly makes his way back into the house. Angela regains consciousness in the basement, where she finds herself tied up alongside Jackson, who is in a similarly dire situation. She apologizes to Jackson for their current predicament, and they see the spirits of the 3 deceased girls in front of them. Mrs. Green arrives and coldly blames Angela and Jackson for their current situation. She orders Herman to drag Jackson out to the shed to kill him. Just as Mrs. Green begins to sew Angela's mouth shut, Elliot interrupts, and Herman is ordered to attack him. As they struggle, Elliot managed to overpower and kill Herman, before going to untie Angela. Enraged by the death of her son, Mrs. Green grabs a meat cleaver and savagely attacks Elliot, hitting him repeatedly. As Elliot collapses from his injuries, Angela, desperate to save both herself and Elliot, pleads with the girls' spirits for help. Just as Mrs. Green is about to deliver the final blow to Elliot, the girls begin to scream, and the ear-piercing sound distracts the elderly woman, giving Angela enough time to free herself. Angela ultimately kills Mrs. Green by piercing her neck with a screwdriver. With her dead, the spirits of the murdered girls are finally freed, their long torment coming to an end. As Angela limps away from the house, she catches a glimpse of Jackson's ghost searching for Beth, before wandering down the road, a tragic reminder of the horrors they've endured. Overwhelmed with grief and exhaustion, Angela breaks down crying, and her sobs catch the attention of a passing car. Angela and Elliot are taken to the hospital, where they are treated for their injuries. Both remain in shock, haunted by the traumatic events they've just survived. On the phone with her grandfather, Angela tells him what had happened, and her grandfather sobs, telling her she can't be alone. However, Angela replies, "I'm not alone," as a dark shadow passes over her, and the movie concludes. Okay guys, that's all the recap about Malevolent from 2018. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next video.